of the world.
Special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m. a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Mr. Skidle. Wait a minute, something's happening. Some shape is rising out of the pit. It strikes him head on.
Since the art of drama began, actors have spent their careers giving life to a writer's words. They strive to transform themselves into the characters and to tell the story so authentically that the audience believes they are witnessing reality. On October 30th, 1938, 23-year-old Orson Welles achieved that goal perhaps more completely than anyone has even to this day. On that fall evening, normally discerning Americans became so totally captivated by his dramatic radio show that they forgot that it was the night before Halloween. They ignored the fact that Wells Mercury Theater broadcast a mysterious drama coast to coast every week at that time. And they suspended any disbelief of the existence of extraterrestrials. As they sat glued to their radios, they firmly believed that they were listening to the actual real-time accounts of a deadly takeover of the United States by Martians. Listeners were moved to hastily get into their cars and try to escape. Throughout New York, families left their homes in a panic. Those fleeing in cars became ensnared in traffic jams. In Newark, New Jersey, in a single block, more than 20 families rushed out of their houses with wet handkerchiefs and towels over their faces to flee from what they believed was to be a gas raid. Some began moving household furniture. Thousands called the police, radio stations, and newspapers in New York and other cities in the U.S. and Canada, seeking advice on protective measures against the raids. Phone lines were overloaded. Scores of people required medical treatment for shock. How could this happen? How could so many be so completely deceived? There's not just one reason, but several circumstances that align to create the perfect setting for Orson Welles' broadcast to cause what could only be called mass hysteria. The most important of these factors was the time, October 1938. Franklin D. Roosevelt was president.
My firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
The Great Depression that saw the stock market crash back in 1929 was nearly at its end. On the surface, times were good. The New York Yankees defeated the Chicago Cubs in the World Series. The Chicago Bears redeemed themselves by beating the Washington Redskins after losing the championship to them the year before. Roy Acuff joined the Grand Ole Opry. And in Dearborn, Michigan, Henry Ford unveiled his lineup of cars for 1939, including the brand new Mercury. But beneath the surface, all was not well. In Germany, the Jews were feeling the beginnings of their terrible persecution to come. In March 1938, German troops occupied Austria, and Hitler proclaimed it part of Germany. In September, an international crisis developed around the future of a little-known area of then Czechoslovakia. It had the potential to escalate into another world war. Although the crisis in Czechoslovakia was resolved by an agreement in Munich, judging by the frightening military machine that the Third Reich was building, it seemed that Europe was still headed toward another massive conflict. Winston Churchill warned, "Do not suppose this is the end. This is only the beginning of the reckoning." The world was on edge that Sunday evening at 8 o'clock. As announcer, Dan Seymour started the weekly radio broadcast of the Mercury Theater across the airwaves.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles.
When Orson Welles took the microphone, he was a young man on the edge of greatness, already wearing the title of Boy Genius. He was born on May 6, 1915, to the wealthy Welles family in Kenosha, Wisconsin. His mother, Beatrice, was a pianist and singer. His father, Richard, an inventor of carbide lamps. To say young Orson was precocious or gifted even seemed an understatement. At 18 months, family friend Dr. Maurice Bernstein proclaimed Orson a genius. The boy began acting, writing, and directing for theater at an early age. In 1926, he earned his first rave press review. The Madison Journal proclaimed, cartoonist, actor, poet, and only 10. At 16, Welles took a trip alone to Ireland and sweet-talked his way into Dublin's Gate Theatre and a starring role. He was heralded with more rave reviews. Upon his return to the U.S. in 1934, Welles began to dabble in motion picture film. Although sound features had been around for years, Orson and a group of friends made a short silent film called Hearts of Age. While the crudeness of the film may have caused Welles some embarrassment in his later years, it is clearly the work of someone with a strong vision. Experimenting with many effects, including camera exposure, unnatural angles, reversal film, makeup, and harsh shadow, Welles creates a backdrop for the style that would become his trademark. It's hard to see this footage and not be reminded of the many scenes in Citizen Kane where the camera becomes an unnatural observer. Beneath all that makeup, Orson's filmmaking genius was already showing at only 19 years old. Back in the U.S., his success continued. Soon he broke into radio. Then in 1936, Welles made his New York stage debut, surrounded by the kind of controversy that would become his trademark. Together with his friend John Houseman, Orson produced a play for the Harlem stage, subsidized by the Federal Theater Project, a part of Roosevelt's New Deal WPA. But this was not just any play. It was a version of Macbeth set in Haiti, with voodoo witch doctors substituted for the three witches in the play. Drums and chanting echoed throughout the scenes. What's more, Welles and Houseman used a group of amateur African-American actors who had never played any classical roles and had them doing Shakespeare.
Ring the alarm bell! Oh, Lynn! Come, Rush! At least we'll die with harness on our backs. What's he that was not born of woman? Such a one am I, to fear or none.
Let me find him fortune. Tyrant, show thy face. I cannot strike at wretched turns, whose arms are hired to bear their stairs.
Thou losest labor, for I bear a charmed life which must not yield to one of woman born.
It was an outrageous idea, but it worked. Voodoo Macbeth played to a packed house and was dubbed the play that electrified Harlem. Welles' meteoric directing career had been launched. In 1937, Orson again worked with the Federal WPA, this time on a short film with music and narration titled We Work Again. The 15-minute picture was a morale booster, touting the agency's accomplishments for African Americans.
Only a few years ago, we were a discouraged people because we were the first to lose our jobs when Old Man Depression came along and the last to get them back. We struggled vainly to regain our bearings while depression, fear, and failure stalked the nation. A tenth of the population of the United States, we formed as a race over a sixth of the unemployed. 1 out of every 4 of us was on relief. In vain, we sought for something to restore our confidence, our hope, our courage. Without jobs, we had no money. And without money, we could not purchase food for the hungry at home. Our only hope lay in charity. Hunger drove our people to the bread lines. Anxiously, we waited for some sign of better days. Then came the federal government's work program. One by one, it took us out of the bread line. It gave us a new chance to take a normal place in the life of our community. It made us self-supporting. It changed the haggard, hopeless faces of the bread line into faces filled with hope and happiness, for now we work again.
At 36 seconds into the Sunday night Mercury Theater broadcast, Wells took the mic and, in his most dramatic voice, set the tone for the historic hour that would follow.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, minds that are to our minds as ours are to the beasts in the jungle, regarded this earth with envious eyes and slowly and surely drew their plans against us. In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment. It was near the end of October. Business was better. The war scare was over. More men were back at work. Sales were picking up. On this particular evening, October 30th, the Crosley service estimated that 32 million people were listening in on radios.
We take you now to the Meridian Room in the Hotel Park Plaza in downtown New York, where you will be entertained by the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra.
For those who listened to the program from the beginning, it should have been quite clear that it was a dramatization of a science fiction work, The War of the Worlds. But millions actually tuned in a few minutes late and would have missed the opening announcement. Why? The answer lies in the popular ratings of the Wells radio show versus another network show and one singer's choice of songs. In October 1938, the Mercury Theater show was getting dismal ratings. In fact, the CBS network had plans to cancel the show the following month. In the same 8 o'clock Sunday night slot on NBC, the Chase and Sanborn Hour aired, starring Edgar Bergen and his talking dummy Charlie McCarthy. This was one of the most popular shows on the air. So, at 8 p.m., as the CBS Mercury Theater announcer was explaining that the show to follow was fiction, most people in the country were listening to the Chase and Sanborn Hour on NBC as host Don Amici introduced the show.
This is Don Amici, rounding up the Chase and Sanborn gang and greeting you for all of them. A hearty hello from Nelson Eddy, Dorothy Lamour, Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy, Robert Arm Brewster, and Judy Canova with Annie and Zeke.
The huge listening audience enjoyed the first few minutes of the show with some of the well-loved antics of Bergen and McCarthy.
You see, I was hoping that I and you could sort of kind of get together like, you know. I started to like you.
You do?
I sure do.
Bergen, get your gun.
Never mind, Charlie. I'm sure you'll feel better when you know that our guest tonight is one of our mutual friends, honoring us with a return.
Nelson Eddy sang a favorite, his signature song called Song of the Vagabonds.
Come on, you beggars of Paris town, you lazy rabble of low degree. You rabble of low degree.
But then at 4 minutes and 41 seconds into the show, Eddy sang his second song, what some say was his least popular ever, the Canadian Lager Song.
Down the rivage we float, the logs they make the grand boat. On the logs we leap and laugh as safe upon the logs as on the road. There's a rock.
At this point, many of the loyal NBC listeners succumbed to the 1938 version of channel surfing and tuned to CBS. They were immediately lulled into believing that they were listening to an evening of musical entertainment. They had no way of knowing that when actor William Allen stepped up to the mic and greeted them, he was in the CBS studio. They firmly believed instead that the voice belonged to the announcer in the Hotel Park Plaza Meridian Room.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. With a touch of the Spanish, Raymond Raquello leads off with La Comparsita.
At this point, actor Carl Frank comes to the mic. Frank was a young radio actor in New York trying to make his mark. His voice would offer the first clue to the audience that something important and unusual was in the air. Playing a CBS special announcer breaking into the broadcast, Carl Frank immediately grabs the attention of millions of listeners.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
Special bulletins interrupting radio programs were all too familiar to American audiences of the time. They were a common sign of important and often disastrous breaking news, a reminder of the tension around the world in the 1930s. So the Sunday night listeners are anxious for more information, as once again actor Carl Frank's voice is heard.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, we are ready now to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer. We take you now to Princeton, New Jersey.
At this point, the audience is introduced to a character whose voice should have been recognizable to them. Carl Phillips is being played by Frank Reddick, known as one of the finest actors in New York radio. For several years, Reddick was the distinctive voice of The Shadow, reading a story taken from the pages of Street and Smith's Detective magazine on the radio show Detective Hour until 1935. Although many actors played the part, including Orson Welles for a few episodes, the role really belonged to Reddick with his trademark laugh.
What evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Even though his voice might have been familiar, Reddick's delivery, combined with the sound effects of the ticking clock in the background and the echo, proved quite convincing to the audience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm standing in a large semicircular room, pitch black except for an oblong split in the ceiling. Through this opening, I can see a sprinkling of stars that cast a kind of frosty glow over the intricate mechanism of the huge telescope. The ticking sound you hear is the vibration of the clockwork. Professor Pearson stands directly above me on a small platform, peering through the giant lens. Professor, you're quite convinced, as a scientist, that living intelligence as we know it does not exist on Mars?
I'd say the chances against it are 1,000 to 1.
Professor Pearson is played by none other than Orson Welles himself. Again, this should have been a recognizable voice to anyone listening. They might have heard him as The Shadow on radio only a few weeks before. Or, of course, they might have heard him on this very show, the Mercury Theater, previously. But even at the young age of 23, Wells was very good at using his voice to convince the listener that what they were hearing was reality. And millions of those listening to the broadcast that night believed they were hearing an interview with a genuine astronomer, Professor Pearson.
And yet, how do you account for these gas eruptions occurring on the surface of the planet at regular intervals?
Phillips, I cannot account for it.
Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Someone has just handed Professor Pearson a message. We are speaking to you from the observatory in Princeton, New Jersey. One moment, please. Professor Pearson has passed me a message which he has just received. Professor, may I read the message to the listening audience?
Certainly, Mr. Phillips.
9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Seismograph registered shock of almost earthquake intensity occurring within a radius of 20 miles of Princeton. Please investigate. Signed, Lloyd Gray, Chief of Astronomical Division. Unquote. Professor Pearson, could this occurrence possibly have something to do with the disturbances observed on the planet Mars?
Hardly, Mr. Phillips. This is probably a meteorite of unusual size, and its arrival at this particular time is merely a coincidence. However, we shall conduct a search as soon as daylight permits.
Thank you, Professor. We are returning you now to our New York studio.
Once again, actor Carl Frank breaks in as the studio announcer number 2, and the tension rises another notch.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth. We have dispatched a special mobile unit to the scene, and we'll have our commentator, Carl Phillips, give you a word picture of the scene as soon as he can reach there from Princeton. In the meantime, we take you to the Hotel Martinet in Brooklyn, where Bobby Millett and his orchestra are offering a program of dance music.
From that moment on, the tiny town of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, would be changed forever as the town where the Martians landed. But 1938 New Jersey was no stranger to fiery crashes. Only a year before, on May 6, 1937, the great airship Hindenburg crashed in Lakehurst, New Jersey, only 35 miles away.
Taken a hold of down on the field by a number of men. It's starting to rain again. The rain had slacked up a little bit. The back motors of the ship are just holding it just enough to keep it from... It bursts into flames. Get it, Charlie. It's crashing. It's crashing terrible. Oh, my, get out of the way, please. It's burning and bursting into flames and it's falling on the mooring mast, and all the folks agree that this is terrible. This is one of the worst catastrophes in the world. Oh, it's...
With the terrible memory of the Hindenburg quite fresh in their minds, the listening audience on that October Sunday in 1938 was now presented with another crash in New Jersey. Carl Frank announces that he has established radio communications with the reporter Carl Phillips, played by Frank Reddick.
We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again, out at the Wilmot Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me, half buried in a vast pit. What I can see of the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. It looks more like a huge cylinder. Has a diameter of 30 yards. The metal on the sheath is, well, I've never seen anything like it. The color is sort of yellowish white. The curious spectators now are pressing close to the object in spite of the efforts of the police to keep them back. Here's Mr. Wilmoth, owner of the farm here.
Mr. Wilmoth was played by actor Ray Collins. Collins, then at age 49, was a well-established actor on stage and in radio and movies. By 1938, he had acted in 9 major films. But on October 30th, 1938, millions believed Collins' voice was actually that of a resident of rural Grover's Mill, New Jersey, who had one of the first close encounters with a mysterious huge object that dropped from the sky.
Would you please tell the radio audience as much as you remember of this rather unusual visitor that dropped in your backyard?
I heard something.
And what did you hear?
A hissing sound like this. Kind of like a 4th of July rocket.
Yes, then what?
I turned my head out the window and would have sworn I was asleep and dreaming.
Yes?
I seen a kind of greenish streak and then zingo. Something smacked the ground, knocked me clear out of my chair.
Well, were you frightened, Mr. Wilmot?
Well, I ain't quite sure. I reckon I was kind of riled.
Well, thank you, Mr. Wilmot. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I wish I could convey the atmosphere, the background of this fantastic scene. Hundreds of cars are parked in the field in back of us, and the police are trying to rope off the roadway leading into the farm, but it's no use. They're breaking right through. Cars' headlights throw an enormous spotlight on the pit where the object's half buried. Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. This end of the thing is beginning to flake off. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw, and the thing must be hollow.
He's moving. Keep back there. Keep back there. Keep those men back. Keep back there. Keep those idiots back. Come on. Take off. The top's loose. Look out there. Stand back.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone's crawling out or something. I can see turning out of that black hole 2 luminous discs. The eyes, it might be a face, might be almost Good heavens. Most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words. Well, I'll pull this microphone with me as I talk. I'll have to stop the description until I can take a new position. Hold on, will you please? I'll be right back in a minute.
We are bringing you an eyewitness account of what's happening on the Wilmuth Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. We now return you to Carl Phillips at Grover's Mill.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I on? Ladies and gentlemen, here I am, back of a stone wall that adjoins Mr. Wilmuth's garden. From here, I get a sweep of the whole scene. I'll give you every detail as long as I can talk and as long as I can see. Wait a minute, something's happening. A humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from that mirror, and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Oh, Lord, they're turning into flames. Now the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks for the automobiles, spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Orson Welles, even at 23 years old, had already mastered many skills as a director. One was the power of a pause. When Frank Reddick finished his dramatic read as Carl Phillips of the horrifying approach of the flames, Orson held the pause. Dan Seymour looked at Welles for his cue to come in as the announcer. Still, Welles held the pause. The engineer and the rest of the cast wondered what was happening. Still, Welles held the pause. As each excruciating moment of silence passed, the listening audience was becoming more and more terrified. People were moving closer and closer to their radios, holding their breath. Until finally, Welles mercifully signaled the next line.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are unable to continue the broadcast from Grover's Mill. Evidently, there's some difficulty with our field transmission. However, we will return to that point at the earliest opportunity. We continue now with our piano interlude.
In 1938, people were quite open to the idea that extraterrestrials, especially Martians, were real and were likely to visit Earth, possibly with hostile intentions. The 1924 Russian film Alita, Queen of Mars was one of the first films to explore the solar system beyond the moon. Although by today's standards the film is quite comical, at the time it signaled that the entertainment industry was shifting from humor to realism in science fiction. The film showed great attention to set design and costumes. Set in the future, Queen Alita rules the planet Mars. The Moscow engineer has recurring dreams of her and builds a rocket-like spaceship so he can pursue her. Buck Rogers was the first space-traveling hero to appear in the mainstream media. He debuted in the August 1928 issue of the magazine Amazing Stories as Anthony Rogers. In 1929, a comic strip version appeared, and Anthony's name was changed to Buck, because Buck was considered more of a hero's name.
Your name, please. Buck Rogers. Lieutenant Rogers, officially.
Then came radio. On November 7, 1932, the Buck Rogers radio show premiered at 7:15 p.m. on CBS stations. Soon, its listeners grew to 58,000 on over 23 stations all over the U.S. Interestingly, actor Carl Frank became the voice of Buck Rogers on radio in 1939.
Buck Rogers in the 25th century.
Buck Rogers is on the air.
The radio show continued until 1947. The comic strip lasted until 1967. And Buck Rogers was seen on television and in films throughout the years. Buck Rogers was the first interplanetary space hero, but Flash Gordon was probably the first intergalactic superhero.
Flash Gordon! You didn't think you'd get away with this, did you, Ming?
Their names said it all. Buck was a much more down-to-earth spaceman headed off to places like Saturn.
My, what a desolate-looking place.
And Flash had more flash, traveling to the planet Mongo and fighting evil ones with exotic names like the Ape Man of More. Flash Gordon was a comic strip originally created by Alex Raymond and first appeared in the Sunday pages on January 7, 1934. It was an immediate success. The public very quickly became accustomed to space travel as Flash and his companions Dr. Hans Zarkov and Dale Arden battled the evil ways of the vicious tyrant Ming the Merciless. Flash's interplanetary exploits were adapted for radio in 1935.
Presenting the amazing interplanetary adventures of Flash Gordon and Dale Arden.
In 1936, America began seeing serial films of Flash Gordon on the screen, portrayed by Olympic swimmer and gold medal winner Buster Crabbe. Crabbe was perfect for the role of space adventurer. In fact, so perfect that he starred in not only the Flash Gordon films, but also the Buck Rogers serial in 1939. The serials were filmed in up to 15 separate parts. For 1 week, each part would be screened at the same theater. The serial would end with Flash in a perilous cliffhanger from which there seemed no escape. The audience would have to return the next week to find out what happened. With all this space travel in print, on screen, and on the radio waves in 1938, Americans were ready, it seemed, to believe that fiction had become reality. Another bulletin interrupted the music as the CBS radio broadcast continued.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill, their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition. The next voice you hear will be that of Brigadier General Montgomery Smith, commander of the state militia at Trenton, New Jersey.
I have been requested by the governor of New Jersey to place the counties of Mercer and Middlesex as far west as Princeton and east to Jamesburg under martial law. No one will be permitted to enter this area except by special pass issued by state or military authorities. 4 companies of state militia are proceeding from Trenton to Grover's Mill and will aid in the evacuation of homes within the range of military operations. Thank you.
In the meantime, further details of the catastrophe at Grover's Mill are coming in. The combined fire departments of Mercer County are fighting the flames which menace the entire countryside. We have been unable to establish any contact with our mobile unit at Grover's Mill, but we hope to be able to return you there at the earliest possible moment. In the meantime, we take you to... Just one moment, please.
By now, across the eastern USA, the program was causing quite a stir both outside and inside the CBS studio. Davidson Taylor, CBS production supervisor, told Orson Welles to break into the program and tell the audience that they were listening to a dramatization. But Welles refused, showing off the rebellious personality that the entertainment world would see often from him in the years to come. He said if people are scared, that's good. That's the idea of the show. The broadcast continued as planned. Carl Frank broke in again with another frightening special bulletin, and then brought Welles himself back to the mic as the astronomer, Professor Pearson.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have just been informed that we have finally established communication with an eyewitness of the tragedy. Professor Pearson has been located at a farmhouse near Grover's Mill, where he has established an emergency observation post. Professor Pearson.
Of the creatures in the rocket cylinder at Grover's Mill, I can give you no authoritative information, either as to their nature, their origin, or their purposes here on Earth. For want of a better term, I shall refer to the mysterious weapon as a heat ray. It's my guess that in some way they are able to generate an intense heat in a chamber of practically absolute non-conductivity. This intense heat they project in a parallel beam against any object they choose by means of a polished parabolic mirror of unknown composition, much as the mirror of a lighthouse projects a beam of light.
Thank you, Professor Pearson.
Crashed spacecraft? Strange extraterrestrials? Heat rays? In New Jersey? How could so many believe it was really happening? One answer lies in a simple fact of human nature. People do not like to feel alone. We want to find other beings living somewhere in the universe. Over the years, there have been plenty of examples that bear this out. We have spent billions of dollars looking for other intelligent life in the far reaches of space.
Could it be that in this amazing universe, 100 billion galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars, this is the only star that has an inhabited planet? I mean, it seems like the height of human arrogance, but that's not proof. The only way you really find out is by looking.
For over 30 years, scientists involved with the SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, have been scanning the heavens for signals from other worlds.
Everything we've learned in our modern studies of astronomy, of biology, of evolution of life, have showed that the steps which led to our being here, including our high technology using civilization, are completely normal steps in the evolution of a star and its planets. And therefore, the steps which led to our existence should have occurred in many, many places, and therefore there should be many technology-using civilizations in space.
Regrettably, the U.S. Congress canceled funding for SETI in 1993, but the search still goes on. Lee Shargel believes that a different NASA project may be the means of contact.
We sent Voyager out in space, and Carl Sagan and other scientists, Nobel laureates, fought vehemently to put that gold plate, that record album on the side of that probe, with the images and sounds of what the essence of human culture is. Why did they do that? Because they hoped that someday some extraterrestrial race would find that probe, retrieve that record from the side of it, see the diagram, learn how to play it, and understand who and what we are, and see the map of its trajectory, and follow it back to this world. And they thought, well, maybe it'll be 10,000, 30,000, maybe 1,000,000 years from now. But someday they would discover that. Why did they do that? Because they believed in the possibility that extraterrestrial life might be out there. Now think about that in reverse. What if they did it to us? Would we say, oh, it's ludicrous, it could never happen? How could we make a statement like that when we ourselves did the very same thing? Suppose they're sending probes out into space, and one of them may have inadvertently come here, and maybe one of those probes had within it the life forms of that other world.
While some search outer space for signs of other beings, others are certain that they have already been here. Just take a visit to Roswell, New Mexico.
I believe that a flying saucer from another planet crashed. I believe that a man and his son found debris, and I believe that the government, the United States government, acquired the wreckage and put it and its inhabitants in storage. That's what I think happened.
In 1947, something crashed in remote southeastern New Mexico. After the pieces of the wreckage were recovered, the Army issued a press release saying it had captured a flying saucer. Almost immediately, they recanted the statement and said it was nothing more than a downed weather balloon. Those contradictory statements caused immediate suspicion that the government was covering up a real UFO occurrence. When it appeared that those who actually saw the crash site were compelled by the military to keep quiet, the suspicion grew. It seemed that only 9 years after the War of the Worlds radio hoax, people were ready to believe that this time it was real. About 30 years later, the people who were there in Roswell in 1947 began to talk freely about the incident. This reignited interest, which captured the imagination of people all over the world.
When I turned around, there was another captain standing there, and he came up and he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, don't go in and start a bunch of rumors. Nothing's happened out here. There's a crash or anything else. And he said, you'll get in some trouble or something similar. I don't remember the exact words of it. And anyway, I didn't like his attitude, and I said, I'm a civilian, you can't do anything to me, you can go to hell. And that's when he really punched me a little bit, and he said, somebody will be picking your bones out of the sand if you do. And that was the only time when I was ever threatened.
There is a cover-up. After many years of investigation, I'm certain that there is a cover-up as far as Roswell. Not by the U.S. Air Force, not by the U.S. government, but by those people who falsely claim that the government is covering up. They are the ones that are withholding key information from the public.
The controversy rages on even to this day. In the small New Mexico town, the craze has grown into a cottage industry of its own. There are 2 UFO museums within the city limits and a third just outside. UFO and alien-themed souvenirs are everywhere, and promotional campaigns and slogans sell every conceivable product and service. Roswell has become an international entity unto itself. People come here by the thousands, all because they naturally want to believe. As Orson Welles' cast played out his script back in 1938 on an unforgettable Sunday night, that human nature trait of wanting to believe was working overtime. Once again, Carl Frank comes to the microphone with a special bulletin.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is a bulletin from Trenton. It is a brief statement informing us that the charred body of Carl Phillips has been identified in a Trenton hospital. Now here's another bulletin from Washington, D.C. The Office of the Director of the National Red Cross reports 10 units of Red Cross emergency workers have been assigned to the headquarters of the state militia, stationed outside of Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Here's a bulletin from State Police, Princeton Junction. The fires at Grover's Mill and vicinity are now under control. Scouts report all quiet in the pit, and there is no sign of life appearing from the mouth of the cylinder. We take you now to the field headquarters of the state militia near Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
At this point, actor Kenny Delmar takes the microphone. The 28-year-old Delmar was an impressionist, dialect specialist, and up-and-coming radio actor at the time. He's most remembered for his later role as Senator Beauregard Claghorn on The Fred Allen Show.
The makers of Bluebonnet Margarine and Tenderleaf Tea present The Fred Allen Show. And in a few minutes, I will be Senator Claghorn. But right now, my name is Kenny Delmar.
Uttering his famous phrase, "That's a joke, son,"
I was glad to see Senator Aikenback. Aikenback, that's a joke, son. I know it's a joke.
which became the inspiration for the Warner cartoon character, Foghorn Leghorn.
Magnolia! Mary Lou!
On October 30th, 1938, Delmar was not heard as a comedic performer. but instead as a captain in the New Jersey State Militia, delivering some reassuring news in a frightening situation.
This is Captain Lansing of the Signal Corps, attached to the State Militia, now engaged in military operations in the vicinity of Grover's Mill. Situation arising from the reported presence of certain individuals of unidentified nature is now under complete control. The cylindrical object, which lies in a pit directly below our position, surrounded on all sides by 8 battalions of infantry, without heavy field pieces, but adequately armed with rifles and machine guns. All cause for alarm, if such cause ever existed, is now entirely unjustified. One of the companies is deploying on the left flank. A quick thrust and it'll all be over. Now, wait a minute. I see something on top of the cylinder. No, it's nothing but a shadow. Now the troops are on the edge of the Wilmot Farm. 7,000 armed men closing in on an old metal tube. A tub, rather. Well, wait, that wasn't a shadow. It's something moving. Solid metal, kind of a shield-like affair rising up out of the cylinder. It's going higher and higher. What? It's standing on legs, actually rearing up on a sort of metal framework. Now it's reaching above the trees and the searchlights are on it. Hold on.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a grave announcement to make. Incredible as it may seem, both the observations of science and the evidence of our eyes lead to the inescapable assumption that those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars. The battle which took place tonight at Grover Mills has ended in one of the most startling defeats ever suffered by an army in modern times. 7,000 men armed with rifles and machine guns pitted against a single fighting machine of the invaders from Mars. 120 known survivors. The rest strewn over the battle area from Grover's Mill to Plainsboro, crushed and trampled to death under the metal feet of the monster, or burned to cinders by its heat ray. The monster is now in control of the middle section of New Jersey and has effectively cut the state through its center. Communication lines are down from Pennsylvania to the Atlantic Ocean. Railroad tracks are torn and service from New York to Philadelphia discontinued, except routing some of the trains through Allerton and Phoenixville. Highways to the north, south, and west are clogged with frantic human traffic. Police and Army reserves are unable to control the mad flight. Martial law prevails throughout New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. At this time, we take you to Washington for a special broadcast on the national emergency. The Secretary of the Interior.
Once again, Kenny Delmar is at the microphone.
Citizens of the nation, I shall not try to conceal the gravity of the situation that confronts the country. Fortunately, this formidable enemy is still confined to a comparatively small area, and we may place our faith in the military forces to keep them there. I thank you.
You have just heard the Secretary of the Interior speaking from Washington. Bulletins too numerous to read are piling up in the studio here. Astronomers report continued gas outbursts at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The majority voiced the opinion that the enemy will be reinforced by additional rocket machines. Langham Field, Virginia. Scouting planes report 3 Martian machines visible above treetops, moving north toward Somerville with population fleeing ahead of them. They stop to uproot power lines, bridges, and railroad tracks. Their apparent objective is to crush resistance, paralyze communication, and disorganize human society. Here is a bulletin from Basking Ridge, New Jersey. Coon hunters have stumbled on a second cylinder similar to the first, embedded in the Great Swamp 20 miles south of Morristown. Army field pieces are proceeding from Newark to blow up the second invading unit before the cylinder can be opened and the fighting machine rigged. They are taking up a position in the foothills of Watchung Mountain. Machines also sighted by telephone operator east of Middlesex within 10 miles of Plainfield.
The program now goes to the battlefield. And the voices of a gunner played by William Allen and Stefan Schnabel as the observer. Schnabel was a German actor. In 1938, he moved to the United States and landed a job with Wells on the radio. As the broadcast continues, we first hear Schnabel, then Richard Wilson as an officer, followed by Allen.
140 yards to the right, sir.
Shift range, 31 meters.
31 meters.
Projection, 37 degrees.
37 degrees.
Fire.
Hit, sir. Got the tripod of one of them. They're stopped. The others are trying to repair it.
Quick, get the range. Shift 30 meters.
30 meters.
Projection, 27 degrees.
27 degrees.
Fire.
Letting off the smoke.
Put on gas mask.
Smoke's coming nearer. Get the range. 22. Please.
At this point in the broadcast, thousands of listeners across the eastern part of the U.S. were climbing into their cars to escape. There were huge traffic jams. Police, radio stations, and newspapers were flooded with calls.
This is it. We thought that this was it. Listening to that show, I said we were very impressionable at that age because of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, and that really made a big impression on us.
One fellow in particular who owned a store took the money from his cash register and loaded his car up with food and took off for the mountains and left his wife and children at home.
New York City was just demolished, and they were coming closer.
All of North Jersey is an inferno, and they are proceeding south.
Now Orson Welles had turned the radio broadcast into a horror story, both on the airwaves and, in a different way, in reality. The entertainment world had been frightening people since its beginnings, with each new director trying to outdo his predecessors. In 1922, German director F.W. Murnau took horror on the screen to a new level in his silent film Nosferatu. He used double exposures, negative film, and a variety of other in-camera special effects to create a vampire classic more frightening than anything people had ever seen before and for years to come. In 1927, Fritz Lang took audiences to a new dimension of fear with a frightening view of the future portrayed in his silent science fiction classic, Metropolis. In 1938, Orson Welles took horror on the airwaves to a level unsurpassed to this day as he continued making his Mercury Theater broadcast all too believable.
Army bombing plane B-843 off Bayonne, New Jersey. Lieutenant Volt, commanding 8 bombers, reporting to Commander Fairfax Langham Field. Enemy tripod machines now in sight. Reinforced by 3 machines from the Morristown cylinder, 6 altogether. A heavy black fog hanging close to the earth of extreme density, nature unknown. Planes circling, ready to strike. There they go. Green flash. They're spraying us with flame. 2,000 feet. Engines are giving out. No chance to release bombs. Only one thing left, drop on them, plane and all. We're diving on the first one. Now the engine's gone.
This is Bayonne, New Jersey, calling Langham Field.
This is Langham Field. Go ahead.
8 Army bombers in engagement with enemy tripod machines over Jersey Flats. Engines incapacitated by heat ray. All crashed. 1 enemy machine destroyed. Enemy now discharging heavy black smoke in direction of...
Newark, New Jersey. This is Newark, New Jersey. Warning. Poisonous black smoke pouring in from Jersey marshes. Reaches South Street. Gas masks useless. Urge population to move into open spaces. Automobiles use routes 7, 23, 24. Avoid congested areas.
I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building. I'm speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building, New York City. The bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as Martians approach. Estimated in the last 2 hours, 3 million people have moved out along the roads to the north. No more defenses. Our army is wiped out. Artillery, Air Force, everything wiped out. May be the last broadcast. We'll stay here to the end. Wait a minute. The enemy's now in sight above the Palisades. Five great machines. First one is crossing the river. I can see it from here, wading the Hudson like a man wading through a brook. This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running toward the East River, thousands of them, dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue. 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen. Out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian. It's Halloween.
The show was over, but the controversy was just beginning to boil over. The actors emerged from the studio to find uniformed policemen in the lobby. In the end, no one was arrested, but the next day there was much explaining to be done. Orson Welles was called before a rushed press conference the next day. Ever the actor, Welles pleaded innocent with an almost angelic portrayal. He denied knowing during the broadcast of the chaos he was creating, a statement known to be untrue by all at the studio.
Were you aware of terror at the time you were giving this role? Were you aware that terror was going on throughout the nation?
Oh, no, of course not. I was, frankly, terribly shocked to learn that it did. I'm, of course, surprised that the H.G. Wells classic, which is the original for many fantasies about invasions by mythical monsters from the planet Mars. I'm extremely surprised to learn that a story which has become familiar to children through the medium of comic strips and many succeeding novels and adventure stories should have had such an immediate and profound effect upon radio listeners.
Newspapers in the U.S. and around the world headlined the news for a week. Politicians, many of whom had fallen prey to the scare, issued condemning statements calling for swift and drastic action. The Federal Communications Commission entered into the fray to try to stop future such incidents. The rules of broadcasting would be changed forever. But in the end, were there any negative repercussions of the event for Orson Welles? Actually, it was quite the opposite. His scheduled to be canceled Mercury Theater show got a new sponsor, Campbell's Soup, and a new life. And Welles, not long afterward, got the biggest prize of all, Hollywood. RKO Pictures gave him a 3-film contract with the unprecedented freedom to call all the shots. At 25 years old, he'd used the fame brought to him by the War of the Worlds to take him to the top of the entertainment industry.
Thank you. How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Orson Welles. I'm speaking for the Mercury Theater, and what follows is supposed to advertise our first motion picture. Citizen Kane is the title, and we hope it can correctly be called a coming attraction. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what you'll think about Mr. Kane. I can't imagine. You see, I play the part myself. Well, Kane is a hero and a scoundrel, a no-account and a swell guy, a great lover, a great American citizen, and a dirty dog. It depends on who's talking about him. What's the real truth about Charles Foster Kane? I wish you'd come to this theater when Citizen Kane plays here and decide for yourself.
What happened to the rest of the War of the Worlds cast? Several followed Welles to Hollywood and shared in the success. Script adapter Paul Stewart played a role in Citizen Kane. Script editor John Houseman, too, worked with Welles on the Citizen Kane production, acting as his assistant and editorial supervisor. He went on to produce and act in films and TV with great success. Ray Collins also appeared in several of Welles' films, including Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons. Collins is probably most remembered by TV fans of the mid-1950s for his continuing role as the rough-voiced Lieutenant Tragg on the weekly series Perry Mason. William Allen also appeared in Welles' films, including Citizen Kane and Lady of Shanghai. He followed this by a successful film producing career, including It Came from Outer Space and The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Carl Frank at first stayed in New York, but Welles finally convinced him to come west and appear in his Lady of Shanghai.
Aquarium of this city kissing each other. Do you deny that?
No further questions.
Kenny Delmar took on his signature role as Senator Beauregard Claghorn and starred in his own film.
I don't know, Mr. Claghorn. My daughter married a northern man.
A southern girl married to a northerner. By George, their children will be half-breeds.
What? Claghorn, we haven't got all day.
That's a joke, son. Half-breeds. Southern girl married to a northerner.
Dan Seymour left the stage for another pursuit, eventually rising to the CEO position in advertising giant J. Walter Thompson Company. While cast members were leading long, steady, successful lives, Welles seemed destined to emulate the rocket that shoots up to where none have gone before, only to burn out and fall back to Earth in pieces. In 1941, rather than being his crowning achievement, Citizen Kane turned out to be Welles' undoing. The essence of the movie was a brutal portrait of newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. It was Orson's swing at high society, and he'd taken on the biggest of the big. At 76, Hearst was one of the richest and most powerful men in the country. Every week, 1 of every 5 Americans was buying a Hearst newspaper. William Randolph built a second home in San Simeon, California, on an estate that was half the size of Rhode Island. This castle, for years, was the gathering place for the Hollywood elite. Names like Clark Gable, Charlie Chaplin, and Norma Shearer, along with plenty of the studio brass. Hearst was a man at the top of the world who was used to receiving the ultimate respect. When he got wind that a scathing film about him was in the works, he was incensed. The part portraying his mistress, Marion Davies, as a pitiful drunk was the final straw. The war was on. Hearst went after Welles and the movie with all the power he could bring to bear. There were threats of smears in the newspapers and talk of blackmail. Even the FBI mysteriously began investigations of people connected to the project. Then the Hearst newspapers put the final nail in the coffin. The word went out, if you run this movie in your theaters, we will not take your advertising for any other movies. RKO delayed the picture's release. Welles fought back. He threatened his own lawsuit. He he announced he'd found people with the money to buy Kane for $1 million, and they would show it themselves. But RKO did not bite. The film's delay gave Welles time for a new play on Broadway and a radio series. His ratings soared. When theater chains started refusing to show Citizen Kane, Welles suggested to RKO, "Show it in tents. It'll make millions. The film your theater won't let you see." Finally, RKO showed the picture in its own Palace Theater. Orson had one last shot at victory. Citizen Kane was nominated for 9 Oscars in the 1941 Academy Awards. But at the event, when the film was mentioned, there were some boos from the audience. The Academy would grant Citizen Kane only 1 Oscar that night for Best Screenplay. It was the final great defeat. RKO quickly retired Welles' masterpiece to its vault. The Magnificent Ambersons, Orson's second picture for RKO, was taken from his control and completed by the studio. RKO hoped that by doing so they would recoup the money they lost on Kane. They didn't. Ambersons was another commercial failure. Welles got the reputation for making money-losing films. At 25, in 1 year, he went from boy genius to youngest has-been. His career never recovered. Over the years, although he made and acted in countless other films, Welles was never given control of a major Hollywood production again. Hearst had won. Fighting the odds of an industry that had soured against him, Orson still pursued his greatest love, filmmaking. He begged and borrowed from everyone he knew, trying to scrape together enough to make his own pictures. He also offered his talents for pay. In 1945, he was hired to direct and act in The Stranger. The wary producer made sure that the film had no possibility of the kind of controversy that surrounded Citizen Kane. It was a very safe murder mystery. Welles plays Franz Kindler, a sought-after war crimes criminal who hides out in a small New England town and assumes the identity of a teacher.
It's hi, Franz.
Meineke, we mustn't be seen talking together. Go back to the church, into the woods, you understand me? Follow the path. I'll meet you there.
Hello, Professor Rankin.
Hello, man. What are you up to?
The Stranger was the only film Welles had a hand in to show a profit in its initial release. It cost $1 million to make, but a year after its premiere, it had made over $3 million. Still, the Hollywood brass was not impressed. Orson was forced to work in smaller pictures and given very little control. In 1963, Welles was hired for a film adaptation of Kafka's The Trial. Finally, he was given some control, with a free hand to write the script, select the cast, and direct. He cast Anthony Perkins in the lead role of Joseph K. Joseph awakens to find himself being accused of an unidentified crime.
You're from my office. Who brought you here? The police?
By 1962, Welles had come to know firsthand the hostility and futility of Joseph K.'s world. When the film's producers ran short of money, Welles' misfortune continued. He was forced to travel around the world, looking for the money and locations to finish the production. Finally, he found himself in Paris, where he happened upon a huge abandoned train station, a perfect location for Kafka's bleak world. Once completed, The Trial turned out to be another of Welles' accomplishments that never quite got off the ground. It was another box office failure that saw occasional screenings before it was doomed to collect dust in the vaults. It took decades before the industry realized the full genius of Citizen Kane and its creator. Finally, Welles began receiving awards for lifetime achievement. Citizen Kane came to be regarded by many as the best film ever made. In the late 1960s, NASA asked Orson Welles to host a program about the scientific view of the possibility of other life in the universe. Over the years, he certainly had much time to consider the Sunday night before Halloween in 1938, when he fooled millions. In this short film, he finally has the opportunity to reflect about the War of the Worlds broadcast in front of the camera in classic Orson Welles fashion.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's. Across an immense ethereal gulf, minds that are to our minds as our minds are to the beasts in the jungle. Intellects, vast, cool, and unsympathetic, regarded this earth with envious eyes. And surely drew their plans against us. Hello, I'm Orson Welles, and I've been quoting from another Welles, no relation, H.G. Wells, the distinguished novelist, historian, prophet, who was also the great master of science fiction. He wrote The War of the Worlds, on which was based a certain notorious radio broadcast, which, as some of you may remember, sent many thousands of our listeners panicking into the streets all over the country. H.G. denounced me for doing it, but later when he realized that our broadcast, like his story, was not intended to cause riots, but just to entertain, we got to be good friends, and I was forgiven. Whether all those people who jammed the highways and even took to the hills to escape the Martians have forgiven me is another matter. Well, quite a lot of things have happened in the world since then. An invasion from the planet Mars, that at least is one thing that didn't happen. But in a way, you know, we have been invading Mars. If Mars hasn't exactly been invaded, well, it's certainly been investigated, not attacked, but thoroughly, very thoroughly studied. Observations of Mars had begun long before our broadcast, and even back then in 1938, it seemed plausible to many people that life could have developed on Mars, just as it had on Earth. Peering through telescopes, scientists had seen what? Well, first a planet that, like our own Earth, had polar ice caps.
Certainly, we should continue probing space and searching for life in worlds outside our own. Someday, as our knowledge and technology improve, we may indeed find what we are looking for. But as important as the search for other life in the cosmos might be, we should never lose sight of our priorities here on Earth. In his parting words, Orson Welles puts it all in proper perspective as only he could.
The difference between the spacecrafts of NASA and the lurid flying saucery of that old radio War of the Worlds is the difference between science and science fiction. And yes, between war and peace. It's our own world which has turned out to be the interplanetary visitor. We're the ones who are moving out there, not with death rays, but with cameras. Not to conquer, but simply to learn. We are, in fact, behaving ourselves far better out there than we ever have back here at home on our own planet.